Hi, John. I want to welcome you back to the podcast. As we were discussing before I started the recording, you're the second guest who's made a second appearance on the podcast in a little over 3 years. So that puts you in
Well,
a very special club.
Steve, it's great to be back. Thank you for putting me on the club. Great to be back on Tech Leader Live. So I
Yeah.
appreciate the opportunity.
Yep. So one of the things I want to talk about today is your new book. Last time we talked about the Amazon way, and that was a couple years ago. And you've got a new book out now, Big Bet Leadership, with your co-author Kevin McCaffrey. So wanted to talk about that. And usually my first question is, what's the journey to where you got to today? But you kind of answered that on the last podcast. So I guess a little bit more with a focus on the book. What was the motivation behind this book and this topic and why you think it's so important today?
Well, I'll tell you the origin story of where Kevin McCaffrey and I kind of
Yeah.
connected and how we came to work together on this book. So in 2018, Kevin was running an enterprise strategy and new business incubation program at T-Mobile. The EVP asked him to kind of figure out how does T-Mobile grow beyond the core wireless business. Kevin was looking for an advisor, a thought leader, and was talking to a lot of partners at strategy firms. And he came across one of my book, the Amazon Way on IoT, actually, and reached out to me and went into the Bellevue office, and he and his team, we talked for a day, and they invited me to be an advisor for their capability. And what they
Okay.
what they wanted wasn't somebody to do the work, and they knew they needed as much help on like what's the concept, what's the strategy, what's the
Mhm.
solution, but more on like how do we work together to do this. And so over the course of 3 years, we implemented and innovated and built on top of many of the things from Amazon, the whole working backwards approach, how to do rude Q&A, how to do active debate, write memos, how to think about portfolio theory and incubation. We took a lot of those practices and applied them into a company that's not Amazon. Clearly not Amazon. Doesn't want to be Amazon. They have their own
Yeah.
perspectives. About a year and a half ago, Kevin was at Google, now running an innovation and strategy team within the Google Ads business. I had a concept for this book. I sent him to him, and he immediately reached out to me, which he never does. And he was like, "I've been waiting for you to do something like this." And so I took a mile with that little invite and said, "Well, why don't you work with me on this?" And so we started collaborating on the book. About a year ago, he decided to leave Google. And so he's been working with me full time on both the book and our business. And so he's joined Rossman Partners. So this book is in one angle. A lot of the things that we learned at T-Mobile and other places since Amazon about how do you make significant change within companies. And that's essentially what a big bet is. A big bet is a concept, a strategy, a plan, a
Mhm.
problem that you want to solve that has these two attributes. The first attribute, it has high potential for driving significant impact in the business, right? It has an ambition, it has potential for significance in the business, but it also has this attribute. It has multi-sided, very complex risks to manage around it and complexities to manage around it. That's what a big bet is. And it's dramatically different than incremental projects. Most people don't realize how significantly different this type of change initiative is versus an incremental project. So a big bet is any kind of digital transformation or AI strategy or operating model change or just complex problem in a business that has that kind of duality of both high ambition and high complexity to it. And we feel like we've outlined a set of strategies and tactics that help significantly address the failure points that these types of initiatives have.
Okay. Interesting. Because you alluded to that. You refer to your book as a transformation playbook. And we had talked previously about how you want not just to give all this information, but kind of make it a system that people will actually pick up the book and actually use it and implement it and get a result. So how did you kind of come up with a playbook idea, and how did that impact the way you write it or the way you laid out the book?
What a great question. We were really thoughtful about it from the start. And one of the things I didn't do with my other books, The Amazon Way or Think Like Amazon, was I didn't really pose a specific um, sequence of activities to do.
Okay.
I left it very open for interpretation, more like, well, here's how Amazon does it, and left the translation up to the reader. In this book, we prescribe much more both what the problem is, how we believe you solve for it, so kind of the philosophy of how your principle of how you solve, as well as specific tactics that you can take. And that was just a step that I thought would be a good step to help driving actual change for, the readers of the book and with the clients that I work with. And so it embodies, it's been almost 20 years since I've left Amazon now. During that time, I've taken their strategies, their principles, their little tactics for how they get results, and implemented those with dozens of clients, hundreds of keynotes. And so in one way, the book is really kind of the culmination of what I've learned about driving this type of significant change across companies. And I wanted to be more helpful to the reader, which is actually give them much more of a system of change and not just individual ideas.
Okay. All right. It's interesting. So what are some examples today, public examples, of some big bets that people are working on? You mentioned AI, but what are some of the latest ones that you're seeing?
Well, yes, certainly AI is a big one. Every company is still struggling with, mostly struggling with their digital transformation. A lot of what I see going on out there is trying to create end-to-end traceability and connectivity. Sometimes it's referred to as a digital thread within their organization, to understand end-to-end the sequence of what's happening. And that gives them the ability to do a bunch of things. It gives them the ability to look backwards and go, well, why did something happen some way? It gives them the ability to look forward and go, well, what's the real bottleneck in my system? What's the forecast that I have? Where should I apply additional improvement? As we all understand flow, and I don't mean personal flow. I mean like as in the goal, the flow of how a system works. You know that if you don't address the actual bottleneck of an end-to-end capability, you actually don't improve the throughput of that capability. And so a lot of companies are looking at, how do I actually improve end-to-end effective outcomes of the business by having kind of a digital capability. When you do that, then you come along with a lot of other ancillary benefits, such as then you have a very rich set of digital exhaust, and you can start applying AI and advanced analytics to it and everything. So those are some of the big bets, but you also see, business model big bets going on. I think certainly, Microsoft's investment in OpenAI is definitely a form of a very contained big bet, meaning like it has big potential, but they've done a masterful job of kind of not actually betting that much. And that's the secret of the book. Although it's named Big Bets, the big isn't the bet. The big is the ambition. The whole playbook is around how do you amplify the ambition, but actually take early steps to de-risk the approach in a significant amount, so that by the end of actually investing, it's no longer a bet, it's just a good investment. That's the secret of how big bet legends actually create systematic change, is they identify very early what they believe the killer feature is, the unique value proposition of what they want to offer. They create clarity and focus on that, and they figure out What are the true risks relative to that? They build backwards. They pull those risks forward and they defer out as much other things as possible in order to
Okay.
de-risk it before they actually start investing significantly in that. And so if you look at what Microsoft has done with OpenAI, they've essentially placed an option on this capability while they are free to continue to explore and build their own. So I think that that's a good one. Intel certainly has a big bet going on out there, a new chip architecture. They're trying to figure out their place in this new chip architecture world where they've largely become a commodity, and companies like NVIDIA, which are specialized architectures for processing these kinds of parallel logic that need to be processed. They're trying to figure out their big bet on it. And so those are some of the big bets out there. But, I keep going back to like, what isn't going to change? Those durable customer needs. And how do we continue to accentuate those durable customer needs, but dramatically improve them? And so in a business like Amazon's, it always comes back to, more selection, lower price, better fulfillment. And so I really like to work with my clients on like, who's your customer? What job are they really trying to get done? What's the durable nature of how you serve them? And how do we accentuate and build upon that, creating a more durable, lasting value proposition to your client?
Okay. So you've mentioned Microsoft, Intel, and some other big names. From an innovation standpoint, a lot of times those bigger companies have a harder time making big changes. They seem to be better at the incremental,
Yes,
and
they
it kind of
do.
moves slow. Why is this important to the big companies also? And how do they maybe get over that hurdle that this is the way we've always done it? We do little incremental things.
Yeah. So, the book is written from what we learned and have studied from four big bet legends. These are four leaders that Kevin and I have either worked for directly or studied very closely. Those are Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, John Ledger from T-Mobile, and Satya Nadella from Microsoft. Those leaders haven't pulled off just one big bet. They've pulled off a system of big bets. And what we believe the three things they do differently than other very good operational and incremental leaders, but not transformative leaders, do is they do these three things. They create clarity. They do not suffer from vague notions of what they are going to improve. Second thing they do is they maintain velocity. All of these big companies you're talking about, like they'll start a strategy or initiative and they start off with great energy and intent, but they very quickly become just another incremental project in how they actually run it. So they don't have an operating model that actually maintains velocity. And the third thing they do, which we've already mentioned, is they accelerate risk and value testing and defer out as many other commitments and complex work to be done until they've actually proven out the process. This is what actual agility is about, right? Like most companies talk about agility, and what they're doing is they're doing micro sprints and agility, but they're really capping it to like small incremental things that they're testing. Their approach is still largely a waterfall approach where you build it all, and it's not until the end that you actually know how it's going to work. And we completely reverse the script on it. So we tell this book through the lens of these four big bet legends and what they do differently to make change happen. So what big companies need to do is focus on those three things, not on everything they do, but relative to their big bets, and create a different operating model, a different leadership approach by creating clarity, maintaining velocity, accelerating risk and value.
Okay. So is this just as easy or possibly easier to implement by a little bit smaller companies?
Yeah, smaller, what I always kind of call line of sight management companies, like those that are easier to get your arms around, both, the business, the stakeholders, how decisions get made, all of those things. Those companies have several advantages. Amongst those is, I have a good friend in the former naval officer, a nuclear naval officer, and he read Big Bet Leadership, and he's like, "Oh, John, what you're talking about is called commander's intent." And what commander's intent is the ability for a general to say, here is the mission with very good parameters, but giving flexible boots on the ground situational control to the leaders that need to execute that. That is what a lot of Big Bet Leadership does, is it creates that clarity of like, here is what we're going to do. Here is what it is going to feel like. Here's why it's going to be valuable. Here's why our customers are going to love it. They do not suffer from vague notions, right? But they understand that the path is an experimental approach. So we set it up to allow for that experimentation to happen. And mid-sized companies have a better ability to do that. But it really does depend upon leadership, like the senior leaders. This book was written for senior leaders at small, mid-sized, and large companies to help senior leaders do their job better relative to actually creating transformation.
Okay, interesting. So if somebody's just picking up the book, a senior leader in a company, where do they start? I mean, read the book. But what's the first step to kind of maybe adopt this way of thinking or start down this path? It's probably going to be something a little bit new for the company.
Yeah, well, I think it's first, it's like, what's the truly wicked problem in our business? And we talk about wicked problems in the book, and I think problem-based strategy development is a superior way of actually creating plans and approaches and resource allocation decisions that matter. So I would start with your customer and the problem that they have that they're trying to solve, or a complex problem that's in your business that you're trying to do. And a lot of the first part of the book, so the first part of the book is called Big Bet Thinking, and it is about how do we think through and actually start experiment by writing and debating what our hypothesis is relative to the real problem and what the future state is, and refine those things better than most companies typically do. And that is the start. That helps create the clarity that we've talked about. And so it starts with recognizing, well, what's the real wicked problem that we have? Sometimes you need to create a portfolio of those wicked problems, and you need to understand, like, because again, resource allocation becomes a critical part of this game. Like, you can't choose too many. You've got to pick the right one to really explore which one of these wicked problems do we really want to explore, and then figure out what's my experimentation path that both keeps the ambition high, but de-risks it before we actually make big commitments. We wrote this book both for the company to have success, but we also wrote it for the individual people who are directly participating in big bets. Because as my co-author, Kevin McCaffrey, often talks about, it's like, there's nothing better and more exciting in your career than participating on a successful big bet. And there's nothing quite as dangerous as being a participant or a leader on a big bet that doesn't deliver, that is viewed as a failure. And guess what? 80% of all of these things fail. The failure statistics are dramatic, but we know that we have to do them. So you see these things going on all the time. Our whole point of view is like, why are you willing to play a game that you know you have to do, but has 80% failure rate to it? Let's change how we play that game. And that's really why we wrote this book, was to give an alternate playbook for significantly switching the odds of success on these major transformations.
Okay. So if there's a group in the organization and come up with maybe a couple different approaches to solve the wicked problem, maybe a couple different problems to address.
Well, yeah, I would say kind of the framing on the problem and the hypothesis about what we think the
Okay.
solution, the future state is for solving it.
So what do you look at when you're maybe considering several different possible approaches?
Yeah, well, here's one thing you look at that oftentimes gets overlooked, which is the juice worth the squeeze? So many times these transformations, they do not create a truly compelling risk-oriented understanding of the financial case that's involved relative to it. So while they'll have a business case, especially after the first version of that business case, they're essentially viewed as fact. And they don't really understand that the business case needs to be at the center of our experimentation techniques.
Okay.
There are built-in assumptions relative to that. And the other, I think one of the reasons we featured Elon Musk as a big bet legend is his ability to create markets by focusing on cost model innovation is a completely unique approach to actually winning in new markets. So Tesla has a 4x cost per unit advantage over their next closest EV car manufacturer. That's why they're able to do all of these pricing moves that they've been doing, because they know the competition can't keep following them down this
Yeah.
pricing range. And so he works from a first principle orientation of truly understanding what is the requirement, and he is willing to delete because every requirement is stupid. That's where he starts from. And so he starts with a zero-based approach to really understand the bare metal requirements that are required and how do we best meet those with a cost sustained advantage. So cost model innovation, I think, is a largely overlooked, under leveraged approach to drive both margin improvement and market improvement and competitiveness, and create that durable competitive moat that we all want around our businesses. So the financial case as a centerpiece for how we proceed on experimenting, I think that's a completely novel approach that we've outlined in the book.
Okay, interesting. So something else that you mentioned in the subtitle, you mentioned about winning in the hyper digital era. What do you mean by that? And is that across all industries?
Yeah. So what we mean by that, I'll break that. Every word in that was chosen with much debate and very carefully. So winning. What does winning mean? Winning doesn't mean surviving. Winning actually within your industry space, it means you making a significant improvement in where you are relative to your peers, from a market percentage, from a margin percentage, from a durable competitive standpoint. We know research shows that bold moves are the only way to actually change your position within a relative industry. So that's what winning is. It doesn't mean surviving. It actually means actually gaining relative to your peers in your industry. The hyper digital era, so this is the preface of the book, and the hyper digital era is essentially a forecast of three mega forces that I believe are going to shape the next 25 years of business change. And the punchline to this is essentially, if you think the past 25 years of digital transformation has been fast changing and has had a lot of new winners and disruption, I think it's going to pale in comparison to the next 25 years. And the thing that's primarily going to change is that operating models are going to change within companies. What it takes to get work done within companies, we are going to see a dramatic shift in productivity in those companies that are actually willing to reinvent their operating models and their cost models. And so there is going to be a whole new set of winners and a whole new set of losers. And it's those leaders that are actually willing to explore this early, I think, are going to be the winners in this hyper digital era. We wrap up the book. The final recommendation in the book is to be an active skeptic. Active means actually participate, invest some relative to your exploration on your big bet. Skeptic means always take a prove it first mindset to making these types of dramatic change. Don't either be passive and just hope that change doesn't come your way or that you're protected for some reason, because I don't think there's many industries that are. And skeptic means one of the mistakes that leaders oftentimes make is they just go, let's go for it, and everything without proving it first. And that's where you get real sideways on these big bets in a hurry.
Yep. Understood. So to change gears just a little bit, I've talked to a lot of authors, author myself. What did you discover as you were writing the book? Kind of like an aha moment or something that came to you as going through the exercise of actually getting it into the print.
Well, this is the first book that I've had a co-author with.
Okay.
And it was, 90% just a tremendous blessing, 10% like, oh, like this is a little different, and everything, right? And so that collaboration forces a little bit of different gearing, a little different approach, but it was all goodness for both Kevin and I. We had the advantage of, we worked together in a very structured manner in a significant way before. So we were very thoughtful upfront about what book do we want to write? Who was the reader? What was the value proposition to the reader? What was the style of the book? We started off with a design principle called TLDR, too long didn't read. Don't suffer from TLDR. But we put a lot of the implementation materials as follow-on free materials to the book. So when you buy the book, you get way more than just a book. You get a set of journals and prompts and a GPT and a bunch of other tools, a pre-flight checklist to help you implement this in your own organization. And so, like any really good bet, we were very clear up front about our constraints and how we were going to work together and what we were trying to accomplish. And that worked extremely well. But no matter how good you plan it, you still discover things along the way. And so we were willing to, rework some significant aspects of the book because we were like, you know what, we're diluting it. We're not making it better with whatever we were working on. And so, we had a couple of restarts on some chapters and things like that. And I think one of the things that Kevin really brought to the book was each chapter has a very unique and non-traditional, all but one chapter. One chapter is purposefully about some basics, but all the other chapters bring about some very unique solutions to solve problems in companies and how they work through. Even on the one chapter that I would say is about the fundamentals, we have some very unique, and those two fundamentals are about kind of team culture and communication. We have some very unique strategies to help do that are purpose fit for what a big bet is.
Okay. All right. Interesting. Everybody I talk to, when they start the book and they think, well, I've got the roadmap, it's done. I just got to go through and write it. But it takes a lot of turns and twists and like you said, some restarts.
You better, if you want to write something that's important, that ties together a lot of ideas and techniques. So, my pet peeve on a business book is that it's essentially one idea and it's told over 20 times throughout the book. And it really should just be a very good blog article, right? It really shouldn't be a book. But if you want to take a book that integrates a set of concepts together, which is what the type of book that I find interesting and that hopefully we've delivered in Big Bet Leadership. I believe we have, but it's up to the reader to make that decision and everything. But those types of books, like they're work, and everything. And so you better be willing to do the work that it takes to write something that actually adds to, don't just restate what's already out there. Like what's the new thing you're bringing relative to your book?
Yeah. Yep. That's good. So you're involved in a variety of different activities these days. What's the favorite part of your current work?
Um, at the end of the day, I'm an engineer by background. So the favorite thing I love to do, whether it's in my keynote speaking or the advisory work that we do at Rossman Partners, it's actually working with a business leader to solve a complex problem that they have in their business. And we don't just solve the problem, but we give them tools so that they can continue to do that. Like it becomes a system within their organization, and that's what we really try to deliver, is both
Okay.
like, hey, let's solve for this problem, but let's tweak the how we work and what leadership acts so that this starts becoming part of the culture going forward. Because as the book teases out, the hyper digital era, more change is coming. So for companies to be durable, they have to become better at this type of transformation.
Okay. All right. Interesting. So now that the book is out there, what's ahead for you and Kevin, I guess, for the next year or so?
Yeah. So, kind of to some degree more the same. So I do a lot of keynote speaking. We do
Okay.
workshops with our clients relative to this. And what we are taking out of the book is a value proposition to mid-size and large companies to completely change the power to weight ratio that traditional management consulting brings to their clients.
Okay.
Power is the impact and the speed at which change happens. Weight is the expense and the time and the risk that it takes. And so we're completely reinventing, we're 10xing the power to weight ratio that traditional management consulting brings to its clients. And what we hope the impact of that is that our ability to impact more companies is greatly increased because we've changed essentially the cost model and the impact model
Okay.
of delivering world-class, not mediocre, but world-class advisory capability to our clients.
Sounds like a good plan.
One thing I oftentimes say is, somebody will call me and they'll bring a situation. It's like, we specialize in really complex problems. Like that's a problem, but that's a like, we're not the right team for common problems. We focus on really complex problems.
Okay.
Those are intellectually more interesting for us. That's what big bet leadership is written for, is
Yeah.
like really wicked problems, right? Complex situations to grow, to change, to compete differently. And so I like to say, like, I specialize in the wicked problem business.
That's good. There's plenty of those problems out there, and I don't think they're going to be ending anytime soon.
That's our fundamental belief too, Steve. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I'm sure some of the listeners, well, they'll want to get a copy of your book, and I will put a link to it in the show notes. But if they have questions for you, or they want to reach out to you or Kevin, what's the best way for them to connect?
Yeah. So LinkedIn, John Rossman, Kevin McCaffrey, fantastic. RossmanPartners.com or bigbetleadership.com, and you can get in direct contact with us. We respond to every email. I get people that I've got a client who 5 years ago reached out to me from the Amazon way, and I was like, oh, we're in the neighborhood, let's go have coffee, and he couldn't believe it and everything. And so Frank's a good friend and a client today and everything. And so I love hearing real feedback from the books and how people are thinking about, like what's my first step, or what's my first move, or how do I adjust it to make it the right thing for us?
Yeah, and to fit it into their culture.
Exactly.
And whatever changes.
And they're constraints, right? And
Sure.
Every place has constraints, and so you do have to tailor things appropriately relative to the situation.
Right. Okay. Okay. Well, I will get all those links so people can find you and Kevin quickly and easily. I do encourage the listeners to read the book. I've got my copy right here, if it's focusing right. It is a different approach, and I still have to finish it, but it was good. I really enjoyed it, and I've listened to one of your other interviews where they kind of talked through the book, and it was very insightful. So I know you're busy, John, but I want to thank you for your time. I know this is valuable to the listeners, and a little bit different way of thinking that hopefully might give some companies a nice boost.
Hopefully it's a lot of different way of thinking. And thank you for the opportunity, Steve. Great to reconnect with you.
Yeah, you too, John. So thanks again, and a pleasure to have you as the second repeat guest on the podcast.
Okay, we'll figure out if there's a third time.
Okay.
I might have to write another book to do that.
Okay. Well, you keep me up to date.
Okay,
I'll
I
watch
will.
for it.
All right.